Hey there folks, welcome back for Module 7 of the Microsoft MD-100 course. Today's video is configuring data access and usage. Now, as for the main sections in Module 7, the first thing we'll be talking about is a bit of an overview of file systems. So what are they, the various kinds we get, their benefits, their drawbacks, that kinds of stuff. The second main section will be configuring and managing file access, basically NTFS permissions and that kinds of stuff. And the last and the third section will be configuring and managing shared folders. So for the most part, that's going to be about sharing permissions and that kinds of stuff. All right, folks, if you are new on the channel, maybe feel free to subscribe if you'd like to know when the next lesson in this specific course comes out. And if you would like to help the channel, basically get this content in front of more eyes, you can also help me out by giving the video a like. All right, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at that first main section, which is overview of file systems. Now, I would like to point out that the three main sections we mentioned earlier are not the only topics per se in this course. That's just the main section. So if you would like a more accurate list of the exact topics discussed in this module, you can find that in the video description down below. There's also nice little convenient timestamps there for you guys. All right, so with regards to overview of file systems, I think a good place to start would be to first list the various kinds of file systems we actually get. Now, if you don't know what a file system is, that's basically the structure of your hard drive. In what manner is your data going to be stored and handled, and what's the pros and the benefits and all that kinds of stuff. So the first one, or three, this is the oldest one out of the lot, is FAT. Now, FAT itself, you get various kinds, something we'll go into in just a moment. So for now, I'm just listing it. You get the FAT file system, it's the oldest one out of the lot. The second one is NTFS, or the NTFS file system. Now, that's currently the most commonly used file system on pretty much any Windows machine, especially any client Windows machine. Client, of course, meaning Windows 10, Windows 11, that kinds of stuff. And the third one, the last one, and the latest one is REFS file system. It's a very uncommon one, and this is generally just used on the server side, and for the most part, only in certain situations. Basically in storage situations or in mirrored situations. Anyway, so let's have a look at this first one on the list, which is of course the FAT file system. Now, like I said earlier, the FAT file system is the oldest file system that Windows Client supports. This file system has a low overhead, but also, like you'd expect, many limitations when compared with newer file systems. Surprisingly, even though this file system is very old, it's still often used in enterprise environments because nearly every operating system out there supports it. Scary, right? This obviously comes in handy if a company finds itself in a sticky situation where they are working with other operating systems other than Windows. Something also mentioned briefly earlier when I listed the different file systems is that you get different versions of the FAT file system. There are basically three of them. You get FAT, and then you get FAT32, and then lastly you get exFAT. In case anyone is wondering what the differences between these are, the main difference between these three versions is the size of the largest supported volume, the default cluster size, and the maximum number of files and folders that can be created on the volume. Alright, so the FAT file system is for small volumes with a simple folder structure. The basics of the basics, if you will. It's often used with removable media, like we said. You'll find this is really the case, more often than you'd expect. For example, if you put a USB drive into the USB port of a printer or a scanner or one of those all-in-ones, they generally don't pick up that device unless it is formatted with FAT32. If it's not, the printer will either give you an error of some kind or just nothing is going to happen. Something else I've seen this happen with is if you find yourself dumping a lot of MP3 songs onto a USB stick with the intention of maybe playing that in your car's audio system, maybe if you're driving on the road, maybe it's a long trip, you'd find that most car systems don't actually pick up that USB stick unless it's been formatted with FAT32. If it's not been formatted with FAT32, the car is just going to give you an error of some kind on the screen or just nothing's going to happen. From my experience, just normally nothing happens. So if nothing happens, just go check the file system. Now, since FAT is so old and outdated, it goes without saying that there is no support for security or any other NTFS features. If you were to compare any version of FAT with the NTFS file system, which we're going to discuss next after this in more detail, you will find that obviously many NTFS features are not available with FAT, such as security. You cannot configure any sort of file permissions, nor can you limit the actions of any user on a FAT volume. Basically, any user can do pretty much whatever they want. No security, nada. If you look at things like auditing, you cannot audit users' actions on the FAT file system. This basically means no logs are kept of any kind. So if a user goes and deletes something, creates something, none of that is logged. There's no record of that whatsoever. So if you go check an event viewer, nothing there. If you were to look at something like compression, I think some of you guys might know this better as file compression. The FAT system does not support this at all. If you look at disk quotas, it doesn't support that either. If you don't know what disk quotas are, don't worry. I'll elaborate on that more on the next topic once we discuss the NTFS file system, since that's one of its benefits. Anyway, as you might have noticed, other than the FAT being useful if you're working on multiple different systems, it's not a file system you want to go and use. So it's pretty much only useful if you find yourself working on different systems, maybe Windows and something other than Windows. Other than that, FAT system is not something you want to go and use. You're probably going to go and use something like the NTFS file system. Something you might have noticed already with the FAT file system, depending on if you've had the chance to work with it at some point, is some of its file size limitations. For example, a single file on FAT32 file system can't be larger than about roughly 3 gigs. So what I'm saying here is if you, for example, have a memory stick, flash drive, whatever you want to go and call it. If you have one that's, let's say, 8 gigs in size or even larger, and let's say this memory stick of yours is completely empty, you're 100% sure it's empty. If you try to copy a file that is larger than about 3 gigs onto that memory stick, which is now 8 gigs or bigger, it will not work. It's going to give you an error. Usually the error will say something along the lines of not enough space. This might confuse some folks a lot if they see they have 8 gigs or more free space, and yet they're trying to copy a file that's 3 gigs, or maybe just a little bit bigger than 3 gigs, and now they're getting an error that says they don't have enough space. This is now obviously due to the file system they're using. If you were to format a whole hard drive with the FAT32 file system, which I won't recommend doing by the way, you're also going to experience some limitations. Hard drives themselves, never mind the file size limit, also have a limit as to how big they can actually be. The volume can only be a certain size if you're going to go and format it as FAT32. Now, what exactly that size is, nobody knows for sure because they keep changing the value. Some manuals will tell you it's 40 gig, some will say it's 80 gig, some say it's 120 gig. I've pushed it up to 500 gigs, so I can tell you it's at least 500 gigs. I wouldn't recommend going bigger than that, and there's no reason why you would want to format a hard drive as FAT32. Memory sticks, yeah, maybe. Hard drives, no, there's no reason why you want to go and do that. These are weird limitations, I know, but if you think about it, the FAT file system is the oldest one out of the lot after all. So many moons ago, like in the 80s, the 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, those restrictions were not a problem. Back then, a hard drive wasn't that big. So a hard drive was maybe 5 gigs at most. Most of them were not even 1 gig in size. So there were no files that were that big, so that 3 gig size restriction on a single file on a fat hard drive, that was not a concern back then because hard drives were not even that big to begin with. So you can see that wasn't an issue back then, but nowadays with hard drives getting so big and files getting so big, yeah, now it's a problem. So nowadays we've got to use other file systems like the NTFS file system. Anyway, I think you folks get the picture when it comes to the FAT file system. Let's talk a bit about the second file system we mentioned earlier, which was the NTFS file system. As I've said before, this is the most commonly used file system at the moment, and it also happens to be the default file system for Windows. You can probably also guess that the NTFS file system supports many things that the FAT file system doesn't. The NTFS file system supports security and auditing. You have the ability to allocate permissions to people and also files and folders. You can control to a certain extent what who has access to, never mind controlling what folks can access. It can all now actually get logged. That means a record is kept of pretty much everything that is done. If someone creates or deletes something, that creates a log. And this can usually be found in places like the event viewer, for the folks that's familiar with the event viewer on Windows. The volume with NTFS can now also be larger than what you would have on FAT. You can format volumes up to 256 terabytes in size. That's a whopper, isn't it? The NTFS file system supports files much larger than what you would have on the FAT system. So on FAT system, you'd remember we had a limit of about approximately 3 gigs for a single file. NTFS, that's obviously much, much larger. You're never going to reach that, at least not anytime soon. With NTFS, you can create something called quotas. I think this is something we might have mentioned in the previous module in this course, if I'm not mistaken. With quotas, you have the ability to go put storage limits on volumes. If you don't want certain users to use more than a certain amount of storage on a drive volume, quotas is something you can make use of then. You just go to the hard drive in Explorer, right click on it, and then click on the quotas tab. Easy peasy. With NTFS, you now have compression. Some of you might notice as WinZip or WinRAR, but Windows actually has a built-in compression function. You just right-click on a file or folder, you choose zip, and yeah, normally when you right-click on a file or folder, you will be presented with a little long drop-down list of options. Let's just call it a drop-down list. And then in that drop-down list, there's an option that says send to. It's labeled as send to. And if you hover your mouse cursor over that, it's going to present you with another little drop-down list, a sub-menu, if you will. And one of the options you're going to see here is compressed. So if you go choose compressed, it's going to go and compress that file. Basically, it's going to take less space, is what we're saying here. Since we're talking about right-clicking on a file anyway, if you right-click on a folder way at the bottom of that long drop-down list we spoke of, you're going to go and choose properties. I think that's literally the last option, way at the bottom on that drop-down list. You'll see many options after that. So once you click on properties, many options, one of which is to go and encrypt the folder. You might have to go click on advanced to find it, but you'll find there's a little tick box that says encrypt or encryption. That is called EFS, which is short for encryption file system. A nifty little function to use if someone is concerned about confidentiality. I personally don't like EFS much since I don't feel it's very useful, at least not anymore. The only time it's useful is if 2 or more people are sharing one computer and one of these people has something confidential they don't want the other one to see that's using the same computer. Unless you think of a situation like that, it's unlikely you will find someone actually using this or find yourself actually even using this. Anyway, something else the NTFS file system gives us is reliability. The NTFS file system uses log file and checkpoint information to restore the consistency of the file system when the computer restarts. In the event of a bad sector error, for example, the NTFS file system dynamically remaps the cluster that contains the bad sector and allocates a new cluster for the data. The NTFS system then also marks the cluster as bad and obviously will no longer go and use it. We don't want to go and use any bad sectors or clusters now, do we? Then, of course, the NTFS system gives us other random advanced features. This is things like distributed link tracing, sparse files, multiple data streams, just to name a few. All in all, the NTFS system is an all-rounder that pretty much covers it all of our current needs. If you look at the next and last file system we had on that list earlier, being the REFS file system, this is the latest one out of the lot, but it's not nearly as widely used as the NTFS one we just spoke of. The REFS was first introduced in Windows Server 2012, but it's also available on Windows Client in case you're wondering. Obviously, it has to be available on Windows Client, otherwise why would I be mentioning it in this module for the Windows Client course? The REFS system is built on the NTFS file system, and it is designed to provide the highest level of resiliency, integrity, and scalability, regardless of software or hardware failures. Something you need to be aware of with the REFS file system, which a lot of folks don't actually know, is that it's only or mainly used for mirrored storage spaces. It automatically detects and corrects errors in those storage spaces, and it can do both two-way as well as three-way mirror. REFS includes only some of the NTFS file system's features, so not all of them, some of them. These are things, for example, like security and auditing. So you can go and allocate permissions, and you can at least keep logs of what's going on. It, however, does not support other features which NTFS has, such as compression, quotas, EFS encryption, nor does it support things like volume shrinking, mind you. All in all, the REFS file system, as you guys can see, is more suited for a mirrored storage type of situation, and it's not something you would go and use on the average client computer. It's very unlikely you're going to find yourself or one of your clients using this. The average Joe like me and you most likely will end up using the NTFS file system. So yeah, guys, that is the free file systems we mentioned earlier covered. That brings us to the second main section we listed way at the beginning of the video, configuring and managing file access. In this second section, we're mainly going to talk about controlling what people have access to, and more specifically, file and folder permissions. Permissions are rules that determine what operations specific users can perform on a file or a folder. When it comes to these permissions, you can configure permissions only on the NTFS and the REFS file system, not on the old FAT file system. Assuming you're using NTFS or REFS, a file or a folder owner can grant or deny access to it, and the same applies to anyone else who might have full control permissions. Something else you get of these permissions, which is turned on by default and it actually takes place automatically, is something called permission inheritance. So first of all, when it comes to assigning any kind of permission to a file or a folder, this can be done in two ways. One way would be explicit permissions, which is the exact opposite of inheritance. Explicit permissions is when you or a user has to go directly to a file or a folder and configure permissions on it. That file or folder will not get permissions from anywhere else. The only way you can change permissions on it will be to directly go to it and directly change the permission on that file or that folder. Now, the second way to assign permissions to a file or folder is through something called permission inheritance, which is the actual topic here. To hope this makes more sense, I think I'm going to demonstrate it practically while explaining it to you folks. So let's switch over to a virtual machine I actually have idling in the background. I think this is just going to make more sense to you guys. All right, switching over.
A few moments later.
All right, folks, here we are on that virtual machine of mine running in the background. As you guys can see, it's running Windows 11. Now, this is a blank Windows 11 machine. There's literally nothing going on here at the moment. So what I'm going to start things off with is to maybe go here to the desktop. I'm going to right click there and I'm going to go click on new. By the way, you'll notice this menu looks somewhat different compared to the Windows 10 one. Now, if you're on Windows 10, if you go right click on a blank space like what I'm doing now, there's still a new option there. So that hasn't changed. It's just the menu itself looks somewhat different. I click there on new folder. And I'm going to call this folder folder 1. Not that the name doesn't actually matter in this instance. So this very first folder I'm going to create now, because there's going to be more than one. What do we call this folder besides the name folder 1 that I typed in there? The very first something that you go and create, which in this case is a folder, is normally called your root. So your first and main hard drive is your root hard drive. Your first and main server is your root server. And I think you guys get the idea. So this being my first and my main folder, this will of course be my root folder. Now it also has another name, and once again I'm not referring to the folder one that's typed in there. It is also referred to as the parent. So this is the root folder. It also happens to be the parent folder. Now I'm going to double click on this little folder. I'm going to open it up, and inside this folder I'm going to go make 2 extra folders, because we're not just going to explain permissions to you guys, we're going to explain specifically inheritance. So let me go ahead and make 2 extra folders here. Right click, new folder. Let's call this folder 2, and you can probably guess what the other one's going to be called. It's going to be called folder 3. Let me just go there. Let's go call this folder 3. And then just to really reinforce the inheritance concept, because we need to discuss what parents and childs are when it comes to folders, I'm going to go into one of these folders. Let's make it folder 2. And inside folder 2, I'm going to make one last folder. This is the last one, I promise. We'll call this folder 4. Here we go. So let's go back one here. Now there's folder 1. You can see it there. This is called the breadcrumb, which shows you how deep you are and all that. So folder 1 is the root. It is folder 1, and it's called the parent. Now inside folder 1, which is where we are right now, I have some subfolders, if you want to call them that. These are also called something else, and I'm not talking about the folder 2 or 3 that's written there. We call these child folders. Child folders because they're inside that folder. I'm not making that up. That's actually what these folders are called. They're called child folders. You might wonder a bit, why are these folders called things like parent and child? It is because of how the concept of inheritance work, specifically permission inheritance. Now in real life, if you were to go inherit something, let's say genes, who do you inherit that from? You inherit that from your parents. So if you were to inherit like your nose, your eyes, your ears, who do you inherit that from? Now, granted, your parents got it from their parents, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about directly. Who do you inherit that from? Your parents, of course. And your parents got it from their parents, and their parents got it from their parents. Folders work exactly the same way. A folder inherits permissions from its parent, but it will never inherit permissions from its grandparent. Now, there's no grandparent folders, but that's just an easy way to explain it. So, what I'm going to go and do, just to really explain this, let's close this up. I'm going to right click here on folder 1. I'm going to go here to where it says properties. I'm going to go to the security tab. So sharing is sharing permissions. That's actually the next main section. We're going to be talking about it just a bit. We're going to go to security, which is, well, NTFS permissions. This is the benefit we spoke of that you're going to get with NTFS permissions. Now, what we see there at the moment, those 3, is pretty much as default as things are going to get. With the exception of your local account will obviously be called something else there. Mine's called BurningIceTech, the name of this channel. But in your case, it'll probably be your name or your account name. Now, assuming your PC has been joined to a domain, a company domain, you might actually see another group there. That's a group, that's an account, that's a group. There might be another group there that says domain users or users, something in that regard. So what I'm going to do here, just to really help you understand permission inheritance, is I'm going to go and add some random permission here. It doesn't matter what it is. So for this concept to make sense, it doesn't matter what permission I add or what change I do, as long as there's some sort of change that takes place so you can see it being inherited by the child folders. So I'm going to go here to where it says edit, and I'm going to go and add or remove or change something random. Let's go and add something. I'm going to go and add a random built-in group in Windows. Let's say the group called everyone. I'm going to click on add. I'm going to type in the word everyone because that's a group that's built into Windows by default. If I say check name, you see it actually finds it. I didn't make that. It's built into Windows by default. I'm going to click on OK. And yeah, just so by the way, everything I'm showing you guys is exactly the same on Windows 10. It's the same on Windows 8, 7, and all the other operating systems before that. So this concept hasn't changed. Maybe the cosmetics of the folders changed a little bit, but the whole concept itself stays the same. Now I can probably leave these permissions for the everyone group on the default because that doesn't matter. Technically, I've already made some sort of change, but let me just put it on full control just for the fun of it. Apply. And you can now see the group has been added. Where did I add that group? I added it here on folder 1. So I'm going to click on OK. You can see there it is. Everyone, it's been added. So it's folder 1. I'm going to click on OK. And now to show you guys that permissions has been inherited by the child folders, I'm going to go into folder 1 here. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. Permission inheritance is turned on by default. At any point in time, at your discretion, or the user's discretion, assuming they're an administrator, you can go to any folder and turn off inheritance on a specific folder. And if I do that on folder 2 here, for instance, that'll convert the permissions on that folder 2 to what they call explicit permissions, like you guys saw in my slideshow. So when you do that, it doesn't discard any permissions inherited thus far on that folder. It's just from that point forward, it will no longer inherit any permissions any further. But more on that in a second. So let's go right click here on folder 2. I'm going to go to properties. Let's show you guys the permissions there. Security. And you'll see the group called everyone has now actually been added here. I didn't add it there. It got added automatically. Why is that? Because folder 2 inherited that permission from folder 1 being its parent. And we expect to see the same thing on folder 3 since folder 3 is also a child to folder 1. So if we go to folder 3, we're probably going to see the exact same thing happening there. Properties, security, no difference. Now inside folder 2, you would remember there's another folder in there, folder 4. So let's go in there. Now folder 4, did it inherit that permission? Yes, it did. Now folder 4 did not inherit that directly from folder 1 because that's not its parent. Who is the parent to folder 4? This one here, folder 2. So because folder 2 inherited that permission, that is why folder 4 has now inherited that permission, because it's going to go check what permissions its mommy or daddy, if you want to go and call it that, has now. And it's going to see, oh, hang on, my mommy just inherited this permission, therefore I'm going to grab that too. So if we go check out the permissions in folder 4 here, properties, security, there we go. It's got that same permission because its parent, folder 2, has inherited that. So let's go back one step here. I'm going to go smack pat in the middle here to folder 2, and I'm going to convert those permissions to explicit. I'm going to turn off inheritance. Now, how do we do that? We go right click on the folder, properties once more, security once more, and this time I'm not going to go to edit. I'm going to go to advanced. Same stuff, a little bit more extra options though. So I'm going to click on advanced. Same stuff, a little bit more options. And there's a button here at the bottom left that says disable inheritance. As soon as you click on that, you'll see the title of the button is going to change to enable inheritance. You use the same button to turn it on again. In other words, is what I'm saying. As soon as you click on disable, a menu is going to pop up, and there you'll have the option to go and change these permissions to explicit. You can change it back at any point in time. Let's click on this disable button. Convert inherited permissions into explicit permissions. Yes, please. Let's click on OK. Now, as you can see, the permission that has been inherited previously has not been discarded. It doesn't lose any permissions that has been inherited thus far. We're simply saying from this point forward, going forward, it will no longer inherit any permissions. So I'm going to click on apply and OK, of course, and OK once more. You can see the permission is still there. Now, regarding the child that's inside folder 2, does that mean inheritance has now automatically been turned off for that folder as well? No. Folder 4, which is the child to folder 2, still has inheritance turned on. So should I go manually to folder 2 and manually add a permission or remove a permission or change a permission, folder 4 would still inherit that. Other than that, folder 4 is not going to inherit anything else because folder 2 is probably not going to inherit anything else. So once you've turned the permissions on a folder, like we just did to folder 2, once you've turned that to explicit, if you would like to add a permission, remove one, or change one, you or the user in question here will have to go into that folder and manually add it, remove it, or change it, unless you also happen to go and turn the inheritance back on. So I'm going to go back to folder 1, and I'm going to go and symbolize some sort of change again, just to show you that it does not get inherited by folder 2, and also not folder 4, because folder 4 is going to look to folder 2. So let's right click there, properties, security. What change I make doesn't matter here as long as it's just some random change. I can literally go do the exact opposite and just remove that group. I mean, let's do that. I'm going to go click on edit. Let's remove that group. And there we go. We did some sort of random change. I'm going to say apply. Okay. And we expect that group to be removed on any folder inside that has inheritance turned on. At least any folder that's a direct child to folder 1. Click on OK. Let's go inside. Now, who are the direct child to folder 1? Only folder 2 and 3, obviously. Folder 2 does not have inheritance turned on, so we do not expect that group to be removed. So let's show you guys that. Going to go to properties, and let's go to security, and like we expected, the group has not been removed because inheritance is turned off and it did not inherit that new change. I'm going to click on OK. Let's show you folder 3 did, however, inherit that change because it still has inheritance turned on. Properties, security, the change has been inherited. Let's close that again. I'm going to show you folder 4 now. Remember, where is inheritance turned off? Only on folder 2. Folder 4 still has inheritance turned on, but where does it look to? It looks to its parent. Who is that? That is folder 2. Now, has anything changed on folder 2? No, nothing has changed on folder 2. Therefore, we expect no change on folder 4 here. So I'm going to right click you just to show you that it has not changed. Properties, security, and because folder 2 has no change, folder 4 is going to see, oh, my parent has no change, therefore I have no change. Right, so folks, I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Something else you need to keep in mind with permissions is sometimes you'll have deny permissions, sometimes you'll have allow permissions. And the rule of thumb here is deny always overrules allow. So if you are a user and you are in multiple groups, and I've applied deny and allow permissions to these groups, heck, I could have even applied it directly to your account. All of these permissions could be allow, 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 and if I am denied on just one location, on just one thing, it's going to be denied all over. Deny always overrules allow. Keep that in mind, guys. So let's move over to our third main section, which we mentioned in the beginning of this video, which is, of course, configuring and managing shared folders. All right, folks, so within this section, I think let's start at the beginning by first asking the question of what are shared folders? Now, I think some of you guys can probably guess what it is, even if you've never actually worked with this, just by looking at its name. The name says it all. It's a folder that has been shared. And what is meant by that is the folder on your machine, your server, it could be your desktop, your laptop, that folder along with its contents has now been shared over the network, which means other folks, colleagues, family, friends can access that folder over the network. In theory, at least that's possible. So shared folders are folders that are accessible over the network is what we can say here. Now, what can you actually share on the network when it comes to these folders and stuff? You can only share volumes. Yes, you can share a whole volume if you actually want to. That's not something I would advise you to go and do. It's rare. So you can share a whole volume or folders. Now, you're more than likely going to go and share just a folder, obviously. There are cases that you can go and share a printer over the network as well, and you would access the same way, but that's a story for a different day. It's a topic entirely on its own. Now, if and when you decide to go and share something over the network, do you or this user or this client have some sort of control over who has access to that shared file of yours? Yes, you do. Share permissions control access over a network. I showed you guys that briefly in the second main section earlier when we went to show you guys NTFS permissions. So you would have seen there was a tab that said share permissions or just say share or something regarding that. I'll show you guys that practically in just a moment. So just hang tight for that. We'll give you guys a practical demonstration. So share permissions control access over the network. You or the user can control who has access to a folder or a volume and to what extent. Can they just view the contents? Can they edit the contents? Can they delete the contents? Can they go and create contents in that folder? You get to choose what control is applied. You must have administrative permissions to create a share. So in other words, if you are something like a standard user, it's a no-go. It's just not going to cut it. You need to have administrative permissions, or the user or the client that's applying this or trying the stunt for that matter, they need to be an administrator of some kind. Now, in case you're wondering or pondering, how do you actually view any shared folders? Now, what I'm about to tell you is more for viewing your own shared folders. So if you find yourself on your own laptop, desktop, or server, or even on a client or user's computer machine, and you would like to know what folders are currently shared on that machine. It's probably going to be your client, your user, or your servers, stuff that you want to go and check, because quite frankly, I think on your own machine, you'd probably know what you have shared. But anyway, So if you'd like to know what has been shared, you can go and check it out by using the good old-fashioned file explorer. I think that's pretty obvious. You could go use the shared folder snapping. So in one place you can find this is by going into mmc.exe. It stands for Microsoft Management Console. So if you go in there, you can go and add various snappings of your choice, most of which are administrative tools, and one of which is shared folders. Alternatively, you can go and type in netview // in other words, whack, the computer's name in question, / and then all. And then lastly, something else you can go and choose or do, and this is not the only way, by the way, is to go and use the get-smb share commandlet. Not cmdlet, commandlet. So in other words, PowerShell, guys. So we've got a more or less spitball idea of what shared folders are, but I think just to help once again reinforce this, let's show you guys how to do this on a computer. So I'm going to switch over to a virtual machine.
A few moments later.
All right, folks, here we are on that same virtual machine that we just used in section 2, the main section. And instead of implying normal NTFS, permission inheritance, that kinds of nonsense, we're going to go and do share stuff. So I'm going to go right click on that folder. I mean, it's there anyway. I might as well use the same folder. Why not, right? I'm going to right click on that, go to properties. This time, we're not going to go click on security. That would be NTFS. We're going to go to sharing permissions. So I'm going to click on that. And once you do that, there's two options here. You can go click either on that button there. That is considered simple sharing. So if you hear about that in your manual, if you hear about that in the exam, simple sharing is that one there. Then, of course, you get advanced sharing. They're very much the same. Advanced sharing just gives you a little bit extra options. You can go and change a name by which you want to go and share this folder, but you might as well just go and call it a different name there too, I suppose. And then like a teeny little bit extra permissions with regards to what people can actually go and do and not do. Now, funny thing about the share permissions, the simple sharing one that is, on Windows 10, not the current version of Windows 10, the old versions, the old builds of Windows 10 when it came out, about 3-4 years ago, maybe not even that far back, you could go right click on a folder like so, and there was an option here that says share or share with or something like that, which would also be simple sharing. Now on the newer versions of Windows 10, because they keep releasing these huge big fat updates, we call those feature updates, every 6 months or so, Microsoft likes to go and release updates, and quite often they'll go and add stuff, remove stuff, and change stuff, and usually when they do that is with good reason, and it's probably going to be for the better, but sometimes they do some changes which just can't be explained, and this is one of those. If you right click on a folder on Windows 10, I'll show you guys in just a second, you don't actually see that option anymore. It's missing. Why? I don't know. That was actually quick. You just right click on a folder, you click on share with, and it's gonna take you to this little menu when you would have clicked on share with. So which was actually quicker. Now you have to take the long way of right clicking on a folder, clicking on properties. This applies to both Windows 11 and 10. Once you click on properties, you have to go click on sharing tab, and only then can you go click on this button. So it's not impossible, but it is a longer way of doing things. Usually when Microsoft makes changes, it's to make things better, quicker, easier, faster. And this is definitely the exact opposite of that. Anyway, folks, so let's go click on share. That is simple sharing at the moment. It's just my own account there. So what I could go and do here is I can go and type in an account name. This is quite commonly going to be an account on your machine or your server. So if I'm going to type an account name there, it's probably going to be an account on this machine where I am right now. And if someone wants to access this folder, they will have to first go and access my PC over the network. And there's a pretty good chance it's going to ask them for a username and a password, assuming, of course, you've got that turned on. And if that's turned on, they will have to type in one of the accounts that's on this list. Unless you went and did something like this, like adding, for example, the built-in group on Windows that says everyone. That just means everyone. They don't need to use an account on your PC. It's just going to allow everyone by default. Here you have the option to go and choose read, which is the default, or read write. If you leave it on the default, which is read, this user or this person that's accessing these contents, they will be able to view the contents, they can open the contents, they can copy the contents in some cases, but they cannot go and delete the contents, change the contents, or make new contents. So if you would have put read write, that's basically giving them the full permissions. They can do whatever they want. All right, so let's go back a step here. If I were to have clicked on advanced sharing, like I said earlier, let me just click on that button there. you can give it a different name now. So besides that name, you can go have this folder shared or displayed as a different name when people try to access it over the network. You can go give a little comment there. I don't know anyone that does that, but you can go do that if you feel like it. You can go and apply permissions, which is very much the same. Can they just review it, read it? Can they have full control? Can they go and change the documents? This is an action option, extra option here, the one that says change. So they can change, but they don't have necessarily full control, I would say. So I'm going to leave it on the defaults. Let's just click on OK, click on cancel, and close. So now you guys have an idea of what share permissions is. But before I let you guys go, let's quickly switch over to a Windows 10 machine. Here we are on Windows 10. I'm going to make a random folder on the desktop. You can see the new is still there, the new function. Let's just say new. And up until not so long ago, if you would have right-clicked here on this folder, like I just said, there used to be an option somewhere around here where my mouse is that said share with. And if you clicked on that little thing, it would have obviously given people access. So now I see it says give access to specific people. And there we go, share with. So they've changed it again. So now there's an option, it seems, that says give access to. Instead of share with, it says give access to. And I can go and say specific people. So at least they've changed that. So I don't know if the boss complained or something, but at least they've changed that back. So you can go there. That's the quick way of doing it. It's the easy way of doing it. Alternatively, you can go and take the long route here, which is properties, sharing, and there's your simple sharing right there as well. So just be aware of that, guys. Alright guys, if you have enjoyed the video, do me a favor and give it a like. And if you've got any questions, any comments, please leave that down below. If you give the video a like, it basically tells the YouTube algorithm that this video is good, and it's going to basically put it in front of more people's eyes, which means we can help more people out there. Plus, you'll just be doing me a favor. It's a nice way of thanking me. If you yourself would like to see the next module, be informed of it, maybe next video for some other course, also remember to subscribe. Lastly, folks, just the usual special thank you to the sponsors of my channel, Patreon, PayPal. Thank you very much, guys. Without you, this would not be possible. So yeah, if you guys would like to sponsor the channel, you can also do that. You can find those details in the video description down below. PayPal is there, Patreon is there, and I see YouTube has got a new function now, which you can go and just say thank you or thanks or thank or whatever. It's on the video itself. You can just do that too if you feel like it. It's your choice. Other than that, people, I will see you on the next module, being module 8.
If you love me, let me know. If you don't, then let me.